Welcome to Tim Blackett and Friends. I'm Tim Blackett, a first-time author, a long-time reader, and an accidental bookfluencer on TikTok. This is a show I started after years of daydreaming about it. One day, I sent out emails to a bunch of writers I had no business asking favors from, and these are the ones who have agreed to let me interview them. I hope you have as much fun as I did during the interviews. Oh, and P.S., I'm still working on a real intro ditty.
A one, two, three, four. Tim Blackett, baby dabba doo, deep dee bop bop doo, rippy deep dee bop dabba doo, bo deep dee bop bop doo. Tim Blackett, baby doo doo, baby dee bop bop doo. Tim Blackett, baby deep deep, deep deep deep. Tim Blackett, baby deep 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 bop. Tim Blackett, baby deep tip tip tip. Tim Blackett, Tim Blackett and Friends. Friends on. Deep 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 doo.
Once again, TikTok has come through in its strange and fortuitous way. If it wasn't for TikTok, I wouldn't have started this podcast, for one thing. And if not for TikTok, I may never have read Sophie Mackintosh's work. It seems frivolous, even bordering on absurd, to think I found a collection of work as deep and as thoughtful as Mackintosh's on something as seemingly frivolous as TikTok. But it was in the summer of last year when two of the accounts I follow reviewed Cursed Bread, Sophie's third novel, in the same week. And based on the fact these two had both recommended other books which I had loved, I picked up the book, in spite of its description being one that I would typically avoid. I don't usually like based on true event stories, say, or even historical fiction in general. We all have our faults. And because I picked it up, read it in an afternoon, was completely fascinated by its narrative style and substance, I made my own review of the book. And because I made my own review of the book, Sophie's publicist reached out and asked if I'd like a copy of its re-release with a brand spanking new cover. And through that interaction, I suggested we set up this interview. And that is how Sophie Mackintosh is sitting here for a conversation on the Tim Blackett and Friends podcast vis-a-vis TikTok. Of course, once I had it all organized, I immediately freaked out, thinking I was underqualified to be interviewing a Booker Prize longlisted author. And it still feels like a dream to me. After reading her other work, though, her first two novels, The Water Cure and Blue Ticket, and a couple of her stories, Cursed Bread for the second time, I find that I'm nothing but excited. Nervous, but excited. Her work is some of the most beautiful prose I have read in years, yet is packed full of ideas and questions that I cannot seem to stop thinking about. At once, shockingly intimate portrayals of vulnerable characters and individuals, and a searing critique of our patriarchal and often misogynistic systems and societies. As mentioned, Sophie Mackintosh's first novel, The Water Cure, was longlisted for the Booker. Her third novel, Cursed Bread, was a finalist for the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2023. She was picked as a face set to define the decade ahead by Vogue UK, and in 2023 was named one of Granta's once-in-a-decade best of young British novelists. She has also been a writer-in-residence at the Paris Writers' Residency, the Prague UNESCO City of Literature Residency, and Gladstone's Library. She currently lives and works in London, England, from where she is joining me today via Zoom to talk about her work. Sophie Mackintosh, welcome to Tim Blackett and Friends.
Hi, Tim. Thanks so much. It's really lovely to speak to you, and how lovely to hear all those lovely. Oh, sorry, I keep saying lovely. I should get some new words as an author, but yeah, it's really nice to hear all those things you said about my book. I'm very honoured to be here and chatting to you.
Well, welcome. I'm just as honoured to have you here. I've been obsessed with Booker Prize books on and off for 20 years. I read Life of Pi in 2006, I think. And then made my way through many of the winners. And if I had one dream personally, like my biggest fantasy, it would be to win the Booker. I mean, it feels so big, I feel uncomfortable saying it out loud. I usually say I'd like to be longlisted or whatever. But what was it like having your debut longlisted for the prize? Were you expecting anything like that as you were writing? Or
yeah, it's funny because I wasn't expecting, like you know, it's kind of a dream, and I just wasn't expecting it at all because it was my debut. I wasn't really sure how the process worked, and yeah, it kind of took me completely by surprise, which I think is the best way. Really, I had zero expectation, and well, like when my editor rang me, I was vaguely aware that the long list was going to be announced quite shortly. But my first reaction was like, I hope nothing's wrong. Am I gonna get told off? Have I been like too salty on Twitter or something? And then she was like, hey, so you know the Booker Prize long list is released next week. And I was like, yeah. And she was like, you're on it. And I just kind of freaked out.
That's awesome. Do you feel a certain pressure now after having been longlisted? I mean, I feel a certain pressure just having published one book, feeling like my next thing has to be like bigger and better or something. Do you feel any of that pressure now, or have you just sort of gone back into your writing life? I don't know. How did it feel?
I haven't felt so much pressure. I think because I'm really lucky to have a really great editorial team around me and my agent too. And everyone's it's like very gentle with me in a nice way. I never feel kind of like too pushed or anything. And I guess there's a little bit of competition with myself where I feel like, yeah, I want to be always writing and kind of getting to the next thing. But then there's also a part of me that thinks I've actually published 3 books in 5 years, and like I don't have to be constantly, I guess, writing and writing and writing. I don't want to like force things, but I do love writing, so I
Hmm.
do end up doing it, kind of constantly, and it is my job.
Yeah. So, what does sitting down to start something new look like for you? How have your books come to you?
So they've kind of all come from different places, and there's a lot of percolating that happens beforehand. Um, I was asked recently about, how do I know if an idea is a story or a book? And it kind of made me think about the process because I guess when I have an idea for a book, I'm really thinking about it for a long time, and I'm not even realizing that I am because with Kiss Bread, for example, I think I was just scrolling online and I found the story, like someone had linked to it, and I read a bit about it and thought, that would make like a really good novel. And then, didn't start it for another probably like 3 years or something. But I would kind of periodically return to it and think about it. I kind of have a lot of ideas on my notes app on my phone, for example, which is like, not as romantic as a book. But yeah, I think just having that idea that won't let go, and it could come from like Chris Bread, like a real story that I've seen, or more kind of commonly, it might just come from a feeling or an image, or even just, a kind of abstract idea. I think with my first novel, The Water Cure, I wanted to write about 3 sisters, and I wanted to write in a kind of almost post-apocalyptic world. And I wanted the world to be flooded. And from there, it kind of developed from these quite like vague notions. So yeah, it's almost a mystery to me sometimes.
Hmm. I was so fascinated with Cursed Bread when I heard the description about the French countryside town in the 50s who had all succumbed to the same sort of mass hallucination event or whatever. Like that is titillating enough for a story. And so many people taking that and making a novel could have done so many, like the story that you wrote based on that is nothing what I would have imagined the story to be. And I found it was such a beautiful way of getting so like deep and intimate with these 3, 4 characters more than sort of sensationalizing the actual event. I don't know. How did you come to the story within that true story? If you
It's
can speak to that, I don't know.
No, of course. No, it's a great question because when I started, I did kind of anticipate it more as a retelling. And then as I was kind of thinking more about the story and thinking about how to go about writing it, sorry, I got distracted. So yeah, so I was thinking around the story and reading more about it, and so I did envision it at first as a kind of more of a traditional retelling. But then as I thought more on the subject and started to kind of put some more notes towards the story, I was thinking about what really kind of gripped me about the story, and it was not so much just the poisoning, but the idea of, the strangeness of your whole reality just completely flipped,
Hmm.
about how relationships in this town might be affected. I think there was also for me a degree of thinking, it's not, I'm not from the town, like it's a fairly recent historical story. To just retell it would kind of, I feel a sense of responsibility, I think, and a sense of needing to really get all the facts correct. Whereas if I kind of used it as a springboard for something totally fictionalized, I had a little more freedom there and could kind of use that freedom to explore the bits that I was increasingly interested in, such as, the relationships. And I guess, yeah, one thing I really found fascinating was reading some of the conspiracy theories around it, like, because it's kind of generally accepted now that it was caused by a batch of contaminated flour. But there is one theory that it was a CIA mind control experiment, and it was a purposeful poisoning. So that really grabbed my fascination, and I thought, I could play with that as well. So that's kind of how it developed for me. And because I was writing it, actually, I started writing it in January 2020. So I had a whole bunch of research planned, and I was going to go see the town, which obviously like couldn't happen. That limitation for me as well made me think, okay, well, this is going to be a different book to how I envisioned. But every time I write a book, it tends to turn out totally different than how I thought anyway. I don't know if it's the same for you.
Yeah, always. Yeah. I write with an end in mind, but I never make it exactly there. I'm always a few yards off the end, but it turns into something new every time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of the fun, I think.
It's just interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the best part. Do you give much thought to genre as you're writing? Your books, to my mind, don't fit very neatly into any genre other than maybe literature, literary fiction. But are you thinking, I want to write a dystopian novel, or I want to write, are these things in your mind when you're sitting down to write?
No, not really. I think I like picking and choosing. And in fact, with Cursed Bread, I was a little bit wary of the fact that it was a true event and a historical event. And, it felt like a fun challenge to be like, oh, am I going to write a historical fiction novel now? Like I'm not doing that. But even with my previous two, which, they largely get described as dystopian, but as time's gone on, and even at the time of writing, I don't necessarily think they are that dystopian. I don't know. I kind of see them more as like a parallel world, something again that I've kind of picked and choose from like genre writing as well. So I'm kind of just more thinking about what the story needs and where the story could go, and I guess being a little bit greedy by kind of borrowing stuff from genre, but also just mixing it up as well.
Yeah. Well, it makes for really interesting reads for me, at least. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I really appreciated how your three novels are so different from each other, yet there seems to be a progression, especially through some feminist ideas and thinking. I mean, I'm no expert on these things, but The Water Cure seems to be asking if I can overly simplify the novels. But I felt like The Water Cure seemed to be thinking about, are women safe in this world? And then Blue Ticket moves forward to something like, what does it mean to be a woman in this world? And a mother, of course. And then Cursed Bread seems to move further to ask, is a woman allowed to take control of her own sexual needs and desires? And I wondered, of course, none of this can be so easily summarized as that, but I wondered if you have any thoughts being a feminist writer. Is this a planned progression? I know many people talk about you as being a feminist writer, but I guess, how do these ideas develop from novel to novel, or are you connecting them at all, or is it just, do you have thoughts about that? I wonder.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea of the progression. I think you're right. And yeah, I guess I wouldn't explicitly call myself, well, I would not call myself a feminist writer, but I think it's definitely one thing I think about when I'm looking back at my books, and and I think what, like you said, they're quite different, but what's unifying them, I think, is that sense of, I guess, like desire. And I don't mean just like desire in the context of Cursed Bread for like romantic connection and stuff, but desire for anything. Like all my characters are very like people who are very kind of have this passion and this want, and in Blue Ticket it's very much this desire for a child. In The Water Cure it's the desire for like love and for connection, I guess, kind of like in Cursed Bread. But in Cursed Bread, to me, it feels more like her kind of sexual desire is more a conduit for this, that she wants to be extraordinary. She wants to be, like you said, to take control of her life. So I guess the theme of like women wanting things like very strongly, like desire feels like a neat way to kind of sum that up for me. But I kind of think, when I am writing it, I'm like, okay, I seem to be going back to desire. I almost kind of want to write about something else, but I do keep going back to this, these characters who really want. But I mean, it's not like a new concept, I guess. All characters really want something, but I think that kind of specific feminine desire and how it can be, repressed or pathologized or, just kind of dismissed as silly even. I think just giving some room to these big feelings, which can be trivialized even by ourselves, and to explore the kind of the power of them and how, it can make people do really powerful things as well, like scary things, but life-changing things.
Mm-hmm. I just was so interested in the books, each of them, in that, like you said, especially the first two, but even Cursed Bread, they seem to be borrowing from these genre tropes and ideas. And in one way, like, who's to say there's nothing to be found in those genre novels and everything like that? But the way you've done it is to borrow from these genres, but then use that to explore these big ideas. Like, I found myself just going all over in different directions while I was reading, and especially Blue Ticket. I thought a lot about Sheila Heti's motherhood while I was reading Blue Ticket, and obviously these two books are nothing alike other than they're exploring the idea of motherhood, but it felt like both books are just really thinking hard about motherhood. And is it necessary for a woman to be a mother in order to fully be woman, and all of these big questions? And I guess this isn't really a question. I'm just thinking out loud about how how big the novels felt. Even they're slim mostly, like they're not large novels, but I just felt they were so plumb full as I was reading that it gave me so much to think about as I was reading.
Yeah, thank you. I think like I love Sheila Hati's motherhood as well. Yeah, I think I was really lucky when Blue Ticket came out. There was kind of a bunch of really great books, like fiction and nonfiction, seemed to come out kind of, recording the experience of motherhood, but also exploring the idea of ambivalence around it. And I just, yeah, I remember the time of writing it, like it was kind of, there were questions I was thinking about myself, but also the idea of motherhood became, I guess, like a really helpful focus point to explore ideas, not just about motherhood, but like about, what does it mean? Like, what kind of woman gets to be a mother, or what do we expect from mothers, and how much of, not just what society expects of mothers to do, but like, how do we feel about ourselves? Like, how do we feel about the kind of person we are? Like, do we feel deserving? And if we don't feel deserving, why don't we feel deserving? Like, it was just all these kind of, it was basically me kind of exploring a lot of knotty feelings about myself, and I guess about the narratives as well that we tell about ourselves. I think as well, I just said about how all the books seem to come back to desire, but I think narrative is something that I'm really interested in as well in exploring in my books, like the stories kind of we tell ourselves, the stories we tell other people, and how much desire like plays into that as well. And yeah, sorry, that was kind of rambly. Just
No, that's fine. Your work has also been compared to Margaret Atwood in some ways, specifically Blue Ticket with Handmaid's Tale. But I guess this is a larger question, not just about Margaret Atwood, but do you pay any heed to these comparisons that people put on your work, or the reviews people give and claiming it's one thing? And how do you parse through all that, or do you even bother with all that?
Oh, it's obviously like, it's a massive honor to be described to Margaret Atwood, or, described to, so many writers who are way more established than me. Like, I think, it's really encouraging. I do read my reviews. Yeah, it's funny because I used to get super upset by any bad ones when Watercure came out. But by this point, I mean, I'd be upset by like a really major bad one, but I kind of take it in stride now. Like, it's nice to hear what people are thinking about the books. I'm not kind of seeking them out necessarily, but I will, if they're in the newspaper and stuff. I mean, mainly because my parents will ring me up and be like, "Oh, did you see you're in the Guardian? They reviewed reviewed your book," and they'll like tell me anyway. So it's kind of like, I guess I'm always a person who neurotically just kind of needs to know.
Yeah, I think many of us writers are like that. I mean, some totally avoid it, but I can't help. I have a small book with a small publisher. There's like 12 reviews on Goodreads or something, but yeah, I just keep checking. Maybe there'll be number 13, but
I think as well as like, it's if you miss out, if you don't read reviews, you kind of miss out on the good as well, because sometimes
yeah.
there's nothing like feeling really seen, or by someone, and like writing a book is so solitary, and then having it out in the world and having people read it, it's such like an intimate kind of experience, and a really lovely one. I think, like, I don't know, I feel like everyone who's read my book is my friend. Like, I'm having an invisible conversation with them, and getting like to hear what people have said about it, or thought about it, is just, it's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Anyone who's left a review or whatever, I feel like we're besties, except for that one person who left a 1-star review with no comments.
Oh no.
Just kidding.
I got some pretty terrible 1-star reviews for the water cure actually, but yeah, now I kind of write. It's funny because it came out so long ago. I kind of read them. I'm like, yeah, everyone's entitled to their opinion.
Yeah. To me, I could totally see the Atwood comparison. It made sense to me, but I also kept thinking of Kazuo Ishiguro's work, particularly in his playing with ambiguity and the sort of slow reveal. I'm thinking of Never Let Me Go mostly, but also The Remains of the Day and even Claire and the Sun to an extent. But I'm wondering about the ambiguity in your novels. In The Water Cure, the outside world is never seen or developed, nor is the country at large or society outside of the country that Blue Ticket is set in. And then Curse Bread leaves much to the imagination regarding what is actually taking place throughout and what causes the climactic end. And I really enjoy this kind of writing that seems to ask the reader to do a lot of heavy lifting. But I wondered if you'd like to speak to that. How do you factor ambiguity into your work, and why do you think that's necessary for the stories you're telling?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have always been drawn to ambiguity. I think as a reader, I really appreciate things not being spelled out for me, and almost I think the reading experience being, collaborative, or kind of like a mystery, like trying to put together the clues. So for me, like kind of keeping the ambiguity is not like necessarily something I plot out. And if anything, I have to kind of make sure that I am explaining it, because I guess I'm writing from a position of, I know the story and sometimes I can like maybe like forget that the reader doesn't have all the information. But I think ambiguity is super fruitful in that way, because, it allows the reader to have their own experience. I think like something that really fascinates me is that, people do have their own experience of reading a book, and for many books, but I think ambiguity kind of gives you a bit more space to do that as well. And I think as well, just when it comes to kind of more like disturbing elements, like violence and stuff, having the space is scarier than actually having everything spelled out. Like what happens off stage can be more impactful than something you just see on stage. So I'm a big fan with ambiguity, although sometimes with water cure especially, I'm like, oh, did I go like too far? Like maybe I should have like been more explicit about what was going on the mainland. But then it makes a lot of sense to me that often in my books as well, like they're so interior with the characters, and we're kind of with the characters' experience, and if they don't have all the pieces, then why should we? It's kind of that's a kind of a concern for me as well. I'm so sorry that a siren just went past the house. I don't know if you could hear that.
No worries.
Classic East London.
Yeah, that was part of my next note here. One review in The Guardian of, I think it was Water Cure, what they said, that there is great power in taking a familiar thing, so familiar that we no longer see it clearly, moving it to a place slightly adjacent to our world and bringing it into closer and closer focus until we can see nothing else. And I found that very apt for all three of your books, in that you seem to have this larger picture of what you want to think about, but then you're zoomed so closely into each character. And to me, the ambiguity seems to be a function of the perspectives you've chosen to write in, which you were just sort of talking about. And that is, you seem to stay so close to this single character, even if it shifts throughout a novel, that anything they don't know, we don't know. And that to me feels like that's the kind of writing I want to experience. Again, this isn't a question, just what were thoughts?
Yeah, I think I just got so attached to my characters, and I really like love being in their head. It's funny because I think about because I came from writing novels, from writing short stories, and I came to writing short stories from writing poetry. And I never thought I could write anything long. I found it really hard to sustain a narrative or even have a plot, to be honest. But then I found staying with a character for a whole book and staying with that idea, it turned out I totally loved it. And yeah, to have that time with my character just feels, really a privilege, even though I feel like I put them through quite a lot.
Okay, well, this is interesting that you've come from poetry and then short fiction and then novels. This seems to be sort of the route that a lot of authors take. I wonder, though, about this short fiction. What is your relationship to short fiction? I was on your website and I see that there's quite a few published. I tried to read a few, but I kind of ran out of time. But For me, I love short fiction. It's my one true love. I think I always say, though I don't know how serious I am about it, that it is the truest form of literature, that it's able to do things novels can't, and especially with the ambiguity and thinking about things bigger than the story. I wonder, what is it about writing, I guess besides marketing, maybe it's just that, where people who write short fiction and love short fiction usually end up writing novels. Like even I'm working on a novel, even though as I was working on this collection of short fiction, I always thought I'm just going to stick to short fiction like Alice Munro or George Saunders, though I know he's straight into noveldom now. Anyway, I'm wondering, what do you think about short stories? Do you still write short stories? Are you interested in collections of short stories, or what do you think about all that?
I love short stories, and I do write short stories, but I find I'm actually trying to write more short stories at the moment, and it's funny that that feels like harder to me than a novel. Again, I think just because I love staying with a story for a while and chipping away at it, and with a novel, like going over and over it. A short story almost feels a bit more intimidating because I just feel like I don't have as far to get it. I don't have as long or as much space to get it right.
Mm.
Like there's such a snapshot and there's so much you can do that sometimes it can almost feel a little overwhelming, which seems ridiculous because, a novel should feel overwhelming. But I think with a novel, I just feel like, I'm going to be flapping around there, like just working on it for a while. And with a short story, it can take me as long to write a short story as a novel.
Yeah.
If I'm going over and over it, if it's having many iterations, I'm pretty sure there's still short stories that maybe have like a bit of potential in them that I started writing probably around like Blue Ticket era. So yeah, it's funny how in that way they can, I don't kind of buy the idea, for example, that I could like just sort of dash off a few short stories, but then I have sometimes written a short story. So I don't know, they're so unpredictable in that way.
Hmm. I find it really fascinating, like being on TikTok and book talk, as it were, and so many people, the way we talk about books and the way readers read books. I find it just so interesting how many people actively dislike short fiction, or just say, "I don't see the point. I'd rather it be a full novel or whatever." And it's frustrating for me sometimes because I love the short story form so much to be like, no, you just have to give it a chance, or you have to think of it differently than a novel. It's just, it's something I think maybe too much about, but I wish more people liked short fiction. I find that I have come to more um, revelations or epiphanies or understanding of personhood or what it means to be a human through short fiction than I do with novels. Of course, I love novels and I read lots of them, but it's such a different experience for me.
Mm.
And I wish I could explain that to people in a way that they were like, yeah, okay, I'll read short fiction, but I just haven't been able to so far.
I think the things I think for me, what makes short stories so magical, and the ones that really speak to us is kind of, I guess, I feel like they hinge on a transcendent moment, right? In that moment of like
Hmm.
revelation. And so if you read a short story that does that, it's just like, wow. And it's so distilled and it's great. And in a collection as well, you can have so many great stories that are doing really different things. And I find that very exhilarating, thinking, different kind of forms and different styles and stuff, which, a novel can be maybe more of one thing. And yeah, I think that kind of like that change in pace and that focus, I guess, on like the snapshot of what's truly important. And that's why I think it's like to write them is a really good exercise for novelists, because it does kind of get you in that kind of that focusing place of the really arresting image, the really important
Hmm.
moment of the story, the bit where like everything changes.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. All right, I'll stop rambling about short fiction and move on to this next question here. In all three of your novels, there seems to be a connection between love and desire and violence. In all three, I think characters think about harming or killing people they are being intimate with. The Water Cure, of course, almost centers around this theme with the girls' parents sort of abusing them in different ways while also claiming everything they do is because of their love for their girls. And in Blue Ticket and Cursed Bread, characters sort of crave violence along with their desires for intimacy and sex, and they even think internally, at least, about hurting or killing their intimate partners, or how easy it would be to harm them if they wanted to while they were being so closely connected. Are you willing to talk more about this relationship between intimacy and violence in your work?
Yeah, I think it's I don't know, it's an area that holds some fascination for me, and especially with the water cure, it kind of made so much sense because the idea of a family unit, the cruelty that you can enact within that unit in the name of the good of the unit, and like love and cruelty can be so close together, and you can kind of the idea of knowing what is good for someone else and not necessarily what they want, and it's all such a like a muddy area. And I think that kind of as well, that sense of loving someone so much that it's or wanting someone so much that it's like terrifying, and you want to like you almost want to like hurt them or hurt yourself or something to I don't know, make it more manageable. I sound like I have very unhealthy relationships. I think it's just that kind of push and pull between between like desire and violence, and how desire itself and passion can be kind of a violent experience, even if it's not like physically um violent, just the kind of the just a heightened kind of feeling or emotion. That kind of interplay has always been really just interesting to me, so I like to kind of try and explore it, but hopefully not in a way that is too gratuitous or like for
Hmm.
shock value. It's just interesting to me how emotions which seem so far away can be so, I guess, like dancing together on this edge. It can how things could
Hmm.
spill over to one or the other.
Yeah. No, it never felt gratuitous to me for sure. In fact, it felt sort of natural for each of the characters within your books. But this whole idea is just something I've been thinking more and more about lately, and it just happened that as I was preparing for this interview, I was also preparing for another with a writer named Sidney Hegel. They're from Canada here, and I read their two books, and in each of those, similar themes are there. They're nothing at all like your work, but the books there have the same closeness between violence and love, both between parents and their children, and with romantic partners and just even platonic friendships. There's always a fine line between loving care and intimacy and moving towards violence. So it's just, I think it's something artists are thinking about. I don't know if it's the time in which we live, in which everything just seems to be falling apart and scary, and so even those people we're closest with, it lends itself to frightening experience, or something that you want to take control of in a way that maybe is counterintuitive to what you really want.
Mm.
Like, I don't
Yeah,
know.
no, totally. Yeah, it's funny because in my like sort of day-to-day life as well, I mean, I tend very much to being a very soft person. So it feels I'm like, why am I writing about all these characters who are like, cruel and hurting each other, and this kind of, the strain, I guess like it's just the kind of power dynamics and stuff that really interest me too. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's funny, but like living most of my day today is like, how can I be good to those around me, and how to live in a way that is in a world where everything is kind of so terrible, a way that you can have integrity and feel like you're doing something okay.
Hmm. I don't have a great transition to this next question, but
No
I'll
worries.
just move on. So Cursed Bread has had a re-release with a new cover. Is that, well, I know they had a new cover. That's why your publicist messaged me, and I love that cover. I mean, I liked the first cover, but this new one, I just found myself as I was reading it, even I just kept flipping to the front and checking it out. I really like the new cover, is what I'm saying. But I'm curious about what happened there. I mean, maybe this is just a thing in the publishing world that I'm not aware of, but what went into um, deciding to put a new cover on it for this paperback release?
In the UK, it's fairly standard to have a new paperback cover, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's the same in the US, but like I kind of like just assumed so. But this cover, I really love it, and I've got it's just got such a, like a 70s like film
Hmm.
vibe. So I like it. And it has a strange history in terms of my covers, because it was the original cover for the UK edition, the UK hardback edition. And then we changed eventually to the UK cover, which is like, so it's a bit different to the US hardback cover. and the UK paperback cover is actually just a soft version of the hardback. So I have like 3 different covers, which I love.
Hmm.
And I think yeah, it's actually really cool to see the different, I guess, visualization of different elements of the book through the 3 covers. Like I really love the hardback cover too, and how yeah, it's kind of like the US hardback cover having like kind of trippy still life on it, like very makes me think of all like the food textures in the novel, and of course the bread. But I
Hmm.
do love this, like very kind of midsummer 70s pulpy horror movie poster vibe. Yeah, I was sad when we changed the cover in the UK, and but it's nice that it's really great that it gets a new life now across the pond.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess that's probably more regular than I just thought. I don't know. I guess with my book being from a small publisher, there's no talk of re-releasing with new covers and all that stuff. So I just thought, I don't know. But now that I'm thinking about it, there's several books that I see advertised or whatever that have different covers for hard and soft and all that. So,
Yeah, I know
but
for the Water Cure we had the same cover for hard and soft, but then with Blue Ticket in the UK we had, you know, oh no, we did have, sorry, now I'm thinking loud, I'm like thinking about all my covers. Yeah, there's a whole variety of different covers for the books, which is really exciting. Like, you know,
hmm.
I like looking at them all and just thinking like, wow, like, you know, super cool. And for when books have been translated into other markets as well, you know, like you can have some really different covers. Like I think it's the Hungarian translation of Cursed Bread has a really different cover to everything else I've seen. Like it's very
Hmm.
trippy.
That's interesting. Do you get to have you had any input in the covers, or it's mostly out of your hands?
It's mostly out of my hands. I tend to just like provide a Pinterest board because I
Okay.
work with board anyway. Like I love kind of, I don't know, creating some kind of background for the book, or creating playlists and stuff. But generally, yeah, like I kind of I get to feedback on, you know, whether I like it or not. If I absolutely hate it, you know, I'm sure there would be a chance to change it. But luckily, it's all been fairly great so far.
Hmm. Hmm. For mine, they asked me for input. They asked what I had in mind as I was writing and stuff. So I did give them some notes, just general things, colors I didn't like or or whatever. And the
Mhm.
cover, I find my cover is almost exactly what I imagined in my head as I was writing. So I was really happy with it. But I think for my next book, if I was given the same opportunity, I would say something like, I would really like to see what the artists like interpret and put out there without my input. That seems
Yeah,
exciting to me to have someone else interpret everything.
it's definitely cool. I know with the Water Cure, when they came up with the cover for that, it was, you know, it was such a great experience because I just saw the cover and it was the first one they showed me, and I was like, that's it, that's perfect. Like, you know, I couldn't have done it better myself. Like, I wouldn't have changed it.
That's awesome. On your website, you mentioned that you're, quote, interested in commissions and collaborations that straddle artistic disciplines and work inspired by visual mediums. And I saw that on your website there was one story that seemed to be just an audio story for BBC.
Hmm.
I wondered if you could sort of elaborate on this idea of working in collaboration with other mediums and what that does for your work and stuff.
I love really, like I guess we were saying earlier, kind of the idea of like where does a novel come from and where do ideas come from. I really love, I guess, the chance to be inspired in a different way. So like writing a response to a painting or a photograph or something. And I've been really lucky to have got the chance to, you know, collaborate with artists or photographers and stuff on, you know, creating responses to to pieces. There's a really great ceramics artist called Paloma Proudfoot, and she had a solo show and she asked me to write a kind of fictional response to the show, and it was very abstract. It was actually kind of like almost a move back to my poetry days, and almost a kind of intuitive interpretation of these beautiful ceramics. And I just find that so exciting to do. You know, it's such a different energy to writing a novel, to I guess have this this like impetus to really interpret something that was totally different from words. And the BBC one, that was a part of a series, because I'm from Wales originally, and it was a series kind of about Welsh coastlines, and different writers kind of having a response to writing kind of stories inspired by these coastlines and landscapes. And that was like, really special for me too, because I did grow up on that coastline.
For the BBC audio thing, were you writing with that in mind, that it was going to be purely audio, or?
Yeah. It was a radio commission. So
Okay.
that was exciting as well, because it did change my experience of writing. So I wanted it to, read really well, and I was lucky enough to actually record it. And yeah, it was funny, kind of the experience of, really reading it for radio and thinking about how the words are going to sound and what will kind of, what will translate well, because people are not kind of reading it on the page.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, and it was also kind of lovely with they had ocean sounds and seagulls and waves and stuff. While you listened to it, it just added to it. I thought, what a cool way to write a story, if you get to add sound effects.
Yeah, that was really cool. I loved like hearing it. When it was broadcast, they broadcast it live on the radio too. So yeah, I was just like listening to it in my garden, like, wow, they put seagull noises in.
Are you working on anything right now? Have you started another novel, or what's going on with your writing life?
Yeah, I'm working on another novel at the moment. So yeah, it's kind of in the phase where you just kind of want to be working on it all the time, and it's a really exciting time to be working on it. I have, I kind of teach a bunch. I have other work on, but I'm hoping to just like set aside a little time this summer to just really focus on it and get it finished. And I'm really excited about that. So yeah, it still feels like such a treat to such a treat to write, even though I'm like, it's my job.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty cool. I appreciate that. I know writers all have different experiences with writings, but there's some writers who seem to like kind of loathe the fact that they're writers, and they're like, I hate the writing process. It's so hard, but I do love having written something. And to me, that doesn't make sense at all. I mean, I love when I do finish something and I feel good about it, but the actual just sitting down and losing yourself in something, it's like pure joy for me. So it's nice to hear someone else talking about it.
It's kind of like it's kind of like the marathon running school of thought of novel writing. There's like the idea of like you go for a run and it's horrible, but then you're finished and you're so euphoric. But I'm euphoric during.
Yeah, that's the best way to be, I think.
I think so.
Okay, one last question before we move on to some other things, I guess. This is something I've just been asking all of my guests at the end of the interview, and that is there any aspect of your work you wish people would ask more about? Like anything you wish you could talk about that you don't often get to talk about regarding your work?
Oh, that's really interesting. I've never thought about that. I think maybe I would like people to ask me more about maybe like the narrative structure or the form a bit more, because I think I'm sometimes, when I'm writing it, I'm kind of, I don't know, trying to, in my own way, do some experimental stuff sometimes. And, I give a lot of thought to how a book is structured, and it's not always something like brought up. So like in Cursed Bread, there's a lot of repetition and stuff, for example. And where I'm worried that some people might think that is an accident, but it's actually super purposeful, because I'm trying to really recreate the experience of like rumination and, like details getting warped. Like something things are remembered and re-remembered throughout in slightly different ways. And that was like a very deliberate choice by me. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm worried that stuff kind of gets missed. So yeah, I think just maybe more like chat about the actual formal and stylistic things going on. Like I would love to always like nerd out about that.
Well, maybe I'll have to have a second interview, and I'll just ask you about formal and questions.
And I'll just like, blather on even more than I have today.
Sounds fun. All right. Thank you so much for the interview. I guess that's pretty much the conclusion. The very last question I ask of people is, do you have any friends on books? This comes from a bit I did on TikTok, in which I said, if you tell me any of these books are your favorite books, it's friends off. And it was just some garbage books that if I was just meeting you for the first time and you said, this is my favorite book, I would think twice about becoming friends with you. which turned into Friends on Books, which is those books that if a new friend said, this is my favorite book, you would immediately be drawn and want to be part of that friendship. It's another way of saying, do you have any favorite books you want to pitch, or any books you've been reading lately that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I would say that my favorite book at the moment in that context probably is A Heart So White by Javier Marias. So he was a Spanish author, and it's just an incredible book, really. It's one of those books where everything, it kind of feels like it's many different set pieces happening at the same time, and then everything comes together at the end, and it just makes perfect sense, like a puzzle is solved, and it's amazing and really formally brilliant too. And it was one of those experiences when you read a book and you're just like, whoa, this is actually going to change like how I write. It's not copying it, but just like it's really kind of like expanded my idea of what literature can do, which is always great. And another one, I really love Javier Marias. He died a couple of years ago, which is super sad. But he has a huge back catalogue, so I've been working my way through it. And I just read recently a book called What Happens at Night by Peter Cameron, and I'd never heard of him before, but my friend recommended it to me, and it's just a very kind of gothic, incredible book, very ambiguous, very strange and surreal, about a couple who have traveled to a mysterious hotel in a very northern country and city to adopt a child, but strange things happen in the hotel. And yeah, it's just the kind of book I absolutely love, and the kind of book I'd love to write.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you don't have to do this. I'm just a guy in Canada, but it means a lot that you were willing to sit down and chat. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been wonderful to chat, and I really appreciate you reading my work and wanting to chat to me. Like, it's always a pleasure.
Mm-hmm. All right. Until next time.
All right. Thanks so much.
See ya.